All right. So we find ourselves in chapter 4 of James, verses 4. But we're going to read, chapter 4, 1 through 4, to recap just a hair and get us up to speed here. So, James chapter 4. What is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You're jealous of what others have, but you can't get it. So you fight and you wage war to take it away from them. Yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. You want only what will give you pleasure. You adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? I say it again, if you want to be a friend with the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. It's pretty hardcore. Verse 4 starts with adulterers. You adulterers. What picture does that paint for us? Just that one word. Cheating. Yeah. Takes us back to this idea of being the bride of Christ, both as a whole congregation and individually, each one of us in that role in our relationship with Christ. We like hang out with the world and live our lives day to day, maybe even in a spiritual sense, hanging out with the world. And in turn, sometimes we forget about the design, the order, the respect, and the love that is in the household of our God, Instead, sometimes we get all wrapped up in the passions of the cool things that God's made in this world, and, we go down pursuits that are impotent or even destructive to what God has, his household goals. Or even if we are asking for things and taking that step in relationship with him, sometimes we have our motives a little confused, like James was talking about last week. I want to take just a brief step back into history and take a look at just that adultery situation and just how that affects God on a personal level. We have the flood. What was God's reaction to the flood? He was just sad at what his creation had become. He loved them, but it just grieved him that they were turned out so sucky. And this massive wide-scale adultery made him that, for a minute he wished he didn't create man. We have crucifixion, like Psalm 69 status. Christ is like, they hated me without cause. They just, the worst thing that I can think of is having a wife that you live to love and they hate you because of it. We go to the Jews. Over and over again, there's that situation of adultery and even double adultery. Like what happened with the wives of the Jewish men. They moved into these different, or I got that backwards. The Jewish men moved into these places, they married the people that were from the surrounding countries like they're warned not to do. And then all of a sudden they find themselves infused with that adulterous culture and they turn their backs on their real bridegroom, their husband. Even to the point of I think it was right before Daniel, because we're paralleling Daniel, remember that? So we see Israel go through, and they forget about God. Certain kings try, but overall they fail, even to the point where they have the consecrated items in the temple that are just being abused. And God gives those things to Nebuchadnezzar because at least he will respect them enough to put them in the treasure house of his gods, At least he has some respect for them instead of, the utter lack of respect from his own people who should know better. Let's take a look at Isaiah and just get another picture of that adultery situation. Let's see, Isaiah chapter 1, verse 21 through 27. See how Jerusalem, once so faithful, has become a prostitute. Once the home of justice and righteousness, she's now filled with murderers. Once like pure silver, you've become like worthless slag. Once so pure, you're now like watered-down wine. Your leaders are rebels and companions of thieves. All of them bribes and demand payoff. All of them love bribes and demand payoffs. But they refuse to defend the cause of orphans or fight for the rights of widows. Remember that? Remember that? That's right. Therefore, the Lord of heaven's armies, the Lord of heaven's armies, the mighty one of Israel says, I will take my revenge on my enemies and pay back my foes. I will raise my fist against you. I will melt you down and skim off your slag. I will remove your impurities. Then I will give you good judges again, like the wise counselors used to have. Then Jerusalem will once again be called the home of justice and the faithful city. There's just a lot of loaded language in there, you know? Like, God really feels for these things, for these people. And at the end of the day, like, it's true. You're an adulterer, and you turn your back on God, and you cheat on him with this or that, whether that be an idol or just, you know, why you're doing something. Like, you're doing it for yourself instead of your husband, the person that you're, like, living to serve under. And at the end of the day, God wants to melt us down and skim off that slag. You know what slag is, right? Can anybody tell me what slag is? John? Yeah, it's what you take a precious metal and you melt it down. Correct me if I'm wrong here, anybody that knows, but you take a precious metal, you melt it down, and there's this crap that rises to the top because it's not as heavy. And you skim that off, and then you have something that's pure and valuable underneath. And, you know, at the end of the day, like, that's what the goal is. But let's be clear. An adulterer is an enemy. It's ultra clear about that. James is, like, super bold about it. Sometimes. But it's more of verbal, like, communication violence. And what did we just talk about in, like, James, chapter 2 or 1? I forget. But one of the worst violences is of the tongue. And that comes straight from the inside. Yeah. So, let's see what we've got here. Yeah, the tongue is one of those things that just, it's real little, but like Scripture says, it can do a whole lot of damage. And it, you know, it's always seeking to receive credit and take things out of order, not under the submission structure of God's household. It's always looking for that, like, you know, that self-credit and reasons to get out of things and reasons to get into things and all of those things. So it's really like on the inside and through the communication that our culture has that battle going on. So let's now we know that God has, like, declared people enemies, us even, because of our adultery. That has real consequences. That the source of adultery comes from within the person, and it's there before it even reaches the world of action. But just before James 4 that I read, do you recall what we were discussing? Just at the end of James 3? Okay. It was wisdom. So let's connect it with more of the whole picture of where James is coming from here. So, James chapter 3, starting at verse 18. If you're wise and understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life. Do good works with the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you're bitterly jealous and there's selfish ambition in your heart, don't cover up the truth with boasting and lying. For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and even demonic. For wherever there's jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. But the wisdom from above is first of all pure. It is also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It's full of mercy and the fruits of good deeds. It shows no favoritism. and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant the seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. So right before this, we talked about wisdom, which ends in the peace of the fruit of righteousness. Then right into that, we hit James chapter 4. James is like, why are you guys at war? Why are you guys coveting and taking and killing and all of these ridiculous things? This adultery comes straight out of an utter lack of the fruit of wisdom, Like all of these aspects of wisdom add up to give you this peace that you live with. But these people showed no signs of that fruit. Just taking that back into the realm of being the bride of Christ, we have purity as one of the things of wisdom. The first, even. It's like acting in the quality of God's Spirit, not being impurified by your surrounding influence. Being pure. Refusing to let the world corrupt you was a good way to put it. We have peace loving, which makes sense if the fruit of it is peace. So you love peace. But, that seeks unity. We have gentleness. If we're talking about adultery or even just anything wrong, I don't know what is gentle about disobedience in general. It seems like something that you can only do with something positive. Like if something is disobedient at its nature, like the spirit of it is harsh. You can't have a gentle harshness in principle. Being willing to yield to others. Obviously, if we are supposed to be willing to yield to others, we should be willing to yield to our God, to Christ. The next attribute of wisdom is the fruit of mercy, or being full of mercy and fruit of good deeds. So the way I'm thinking about that in terms of the bride of Christ is like going out from that relationship and representing your husband like you should be representing him, making that household go out and break past the threshold of your door and reach out into the world and be hospitable and effective in that way. And then, I really like this word after we learned about it, no favoritism. So wisdom looks like not having favoritism. You guys remember what we defined favoritism as? Something about man. Anybody can take that clue and run from there? Yeah, basically. Favoritism is respecting the opinion of man, like wanting to impress people, wanting to do that stuff. It's not treating this person better than treating that person. It's the reason behind why you treat that person better, because you want their respect, you want their favor. So James 4, shoot, I lost my place, is describing the opposite of wisdom when we're talking about that. So what we're looking at here is a picture of wisdom in James chapter 3, and then James turns around and he's like, you're doing the exact opposite of wisdom. The fruit of wisdom is peace here, and you're turning around and being like, let's have war with each other. Not even with other people, with themselves. And yeah, it was just really blatant and really sad. I'm having a real hard time here. Hebrews, James. Yeah. So, yeah, we know that adultery in our relationship with God puts us in a real bad way and turns us from the place of a loving wife to an enemy of God. And that outworking is essentially from ignoring God's wisdom. So, getting back to our focal verse in James chapter 4. Let me just read it again. You adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? I say it again. If you want to be a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. I really like it. The whole of James so far has been a lot of wisdom, a lot of implications that people are not doing what they're doing. But then he comes out in verse 4 with an outright accusation. He was like, you people are adulterers, or maybe more accurately, adulteresses from the original language, painting that picture of being the bride of Christ. Yeah, there's nothing like an all-out accusation to put a mirror in front of a person, you know? It's like you can discuss things, and it's like all in concept and all in discussion for a while, but then when somebody points a finger at you and says, you adulterer, it kind of makes it real. And it makes you do one or two things. It makes you either look at yourself in the mirror, or it makes you turn away from that mirror somehow and not look at it. But you can't do something else besides those two options. And I really appreciate that. I like asking questions, like analytical questions like that. So if we're friends with the world, then we're enemies of God. But if we're in a faithful and wise relationship with God, then we're enemies of the world. You know, that puts us in a tough situation, and there's lots of consequences for that on either side of things. But I kind of appreciate it because it sort of makes it more obvious, maybe, because there's weight to it. You know, it's like you can tell. And so let's take a look at some of that. Let's ask some questions. Like, let's take a look at life and ask some questions. Yeah. Why is it, how about the question, why is it that I'm liked? Because we're on the topic of being friends with the world. John gets a lot of rap sometimes. He's gone. But John gets a lot of rap because, you know, he has a tendency to want to be liked by people. And I feel like that, to some extent, takes the spotlight off of a lot of you. I don't know if I'm included because I feel like I'm sort of in the same boat as John. But I like the question, why are you liked? Because everybody's liked by somebody, you know? So when you take a look at those people that like you, can you ask, why is it that they like you? You know? Is it because you push them to grow in a true and honest way, or is it because there's some sort of enabling situation that goes in there? Is it because there's no real substance to your relationship and they can just have fun with it all the time? Is there any tension in that relationship? Is there growth in those ways? Are you representing God's household as you go out into the world, into that relationship? Or what about why do I value my activities? Same situation. Like, pretty much anything can be good. Like, some of you don't know, but I was talking on the thread about a recent revelation I've had about fishing. And, you know, like, before I just wanted to fish because I would have wanted to fish and it probably would have taken away from time. But I'm realizing now that it's, like, compatible and even beneficial in extension of my relationship with God with somebody else like Alex or John, and we go out there and we can like enjoy nature and talk openly and honestly in like this peaceful environment, and there's a reason behind it. But what are your favorite activities? Have you asked, why is it that you like those things? Not that you can't like something, not that it will have relatively little effect on you, but do you like it because it's something that identifies with the values of the environment that we live in, the world, or is it that you are just in it because you want to be, what's the wording in James? You want to only have what will give you pleasure, right before he accuses them of adultery. Or, you know, why do you want the stuff on your Amazon wish list? Like, it's good. Like, all of these questions need to be asked, and I think it's specifics, the why questions, not the first why, maybe not even the second why, but even like the third why, like dive into it. And if you dive in that far, you can't help but to know whether that is being true to being the bride of Christ, or whether that is being the bride of, Baal or Moloch, or, I don't know, Game of Thrones, or whatever. Yeah. I had a big battle with myself in terms of the car situation with that, so that's what I relate to right now. Yeah. I think of just examples like the fishing thing. I relate to like Brittany's dad on that. It's like, I want to give you tangible examples. So it's like fishing. You can say that, yeah, I go fishing and I get closer to God with that. And a person can say, oh, that's good. But you ask why. Why is it that brings you closer to God? I'm going to guess that you're going to have a pretty shallow answer. Because why, if that is true, like, why are you not accessing the other aspects of that same goal? Like the things that God has specifically set up. Scripture, community, what do you call it? Like mentorship. I know there's other good ones that I forgot, but those kinds of things. Sacrifice, like prayer. You have to ask yourself, is your priorities lined up right in that reasoning? Like, why? I don't know. It can be a hard question, I guess. But a specific answer looks like something along the lines of, maybe I fish because I can marvel at the complexity that I've read in Genesis. I can get a great opportunity to have discussions with my best friends, or maybe with people that I'm not even close with, that I have a hard time when we're in a group setting, like at Midnight Monthly, where there's a movie going on, and there's cooking and all of these things, and I want to get out into nature and just have you and me and water and great discussion. Yeah, like, how specific, how deep do your reasons go for those things that you consider important in your life? And I would top that off with the question of, what do you do with those things that you're kind of on the edge about? Just in all practicality, sometimes we don't know. I know that verse about in Matthew where Christ is saying that adultery starts in your heart, the very next verse after that says something along the lines of, if your hand is causing something, bad, then cut it off. If your eyes are causing you to lust, then, get rid of that eye. And I think we should ask that question too, of what do we do with those things that are in the mixed bag? Like, are you convincing your brain before your heart is convinced? Yeah. Lastly, who can tell me who Mishael is? Okay. And Azariah. Now we're on the train, so it's easy to get from there. And Hananiah. I don't think I put them in the right order also. But there is no right order. But we don't know who these people are, because they were so immersed in the culture that they were in that they were given a new identity. They were given a new name even. And yet they were able to live a righteous life in being faithful as the bride of Christ. I guess Christ wasn't around yet, but he was, you know. We can do it. They did it in crazy, crazy odds. But you have to ask the question, you know, just as you're thinking about the reasons why you do things, are we doing the same? Let's break into our cell groups and discuss some of those questions.